today, and that is student loans. The student loan bubble we've talked about. Our guest is the Vice President, Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union, Pete Sepp, back with us. How are you, Pete?
Doing as good as I can, and under the circumstances. We have a lot of legislation moving in the House and Senate this week, a horrible transportation and HUD appropriations bill, some good amendments, some bad amendments. We're following defense spending, and now on the Senate side, we have legislation moving regarding student loans on top of an executive order issued by President Obama also affecting student loans. So lots of things for taxpayers to be aware of right now.
So we have an executive order as well as a piece of legislation regarding student loans. I want to get to the other stuff too if we have time tonight, and if not, we'll just keep going with you. Here's the question, Pete. I'm wondering if the president is going to use that tired class warfare rhetoric. Well, let's find out. Here's the president speaking to what you just spoke of, student loans, executive order, as well as legislation. Roll it.
I don't know, by the way, why folks aren't more outraged about this. I'm going to take a pause out of my prepared text. You would think that if somebody like me has done really well, in part because the country's invested in them, that they wouldn't mind at least paying the same rate as a teacher or a nurse. There's not a good economic argument for it, that they should pay a lower rate. It's just clout. That's all. So it's bad enough that that's already happening. It would be scandalous if we allowed those kinds of tax loopholes for the very, very fortunate to survive while students are having trouble just getting started in their lives. So you got a pretty straightforward bill here. And this week, Congress will vote on that bill. And I want Americans to pay attention to see where their lawmakers' priorities lie here. Lower tax bills for millionaires or lower student loan bills for the middle class. This should be a no-brainer.
Pete, would you give us a thumbnail sketch of the current student loan situation? I don't think people realize, just unless, of course, they're paying them off, and they certainly do. But my point is, we're looking at a bubble the size of what we saw in the housing bubble. So if you could just give us a little thumbnail sketch and then address what the president's solution speaks to.
Well, what we're talking about here is more than $1 trillion worth of student loan debt, and it's been skyrocketing. Now, that's one thing we can agree with. The president's complaining that student loan debt has been rising dramatically since the year 2007, began rising under the previous administration. What we don't agree on is why it's rising. He seems to believe that for some reason students are just taking on this debt without even any kind of market factors in play, without any kind of incentives in play. And there's a huge incentive. That's below market interest rates. The federal government is doing the same thing by creating moral hazard. That's a term economists use in the student lending industry, the same way it was in the home lending industry, by offering taxpayer subsidies for debt that households just were unable to take on themselves. The private market was going to say, look, we cannot loan you this much money for college, for a home, whatever. The federal government steps in and says, wait a minute, we'll float you the money at a lower interest rate than the private market can offer, at more generous terms, and everything will be fine. Well, no, everything will not be fine, because taxpayers are stuck not only subsidizing that below-market interest rate every year, but also taking on the risk of default, which is very high with student loans, and, of course, was quite high with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the housing guarantee giants that have run up upwards of $200 billion worth of debt that taxpayers have been stuck with.
So now it's going to be capped at 10%, and that's for, and then there is more within the legislation to say you can discharge those loans after X amount of years if you're in a certain profession, from what I gather. Is that correct?
Yes, and in the legislation being proposed in Congress, you could also actually, if you took on debt before the year 2007, you might be able to get favorable refinancing terms, or if you happen to take out a private student loan. There aren't many of those left since the federal government has been taking over most of the student debt and student lending industry. But there's still a little bit of that left. Well, the government wants to take that portion too, help to refinance it, again, subsidized by taxpayers to the tune of about $50 billion over 10 years. And what we'll have is a student loan market that is almost completely controlled by Washington, D.C.
Washington, D.C. controlling a market is frightening, as we've seen. It's also frightening because cut number 5, if you could, Arnie Duncan was asked, Education Secretary, was asked yesterday about the cost of the program and the legislation. Here's what he had to say. Roll it.
Price tag for this student loan program expansion at $7.6 billion in its first year. Can you tell us how you'll plan to pay for that?
So we actually don't know the cost yet. So obviously, we have to go through this regulatory process, so we'll figure that out at the back end. But we think this is something that will be fantastic for the economy. And again, the benefits of having people, rather than paying back loans, buying homes, buying cars, investing, starting businesses, there are huge benefits there. But we'll work through the details as we go through the regulatory process.
He doesn't know the cost of a student loan. I mean, again, I mean, we're all... Pete, like you, like me, like all of us, we're putting a roof over our head. We're putting food on our table for our family. We know the cost. I mean, we can get that. Sundays around the table, we'll sit there. Sometimes it's a different night, a different day, but we're all very aware of each and every cost. Business owners especially, they know. So how is it that they're spending billions of dollars announcing an expansion and they don't know the cost? Pete.
Spend now and worry about the consequences later. I mean, that's absolutely the most irresponsible thing you could possibly do in a government, and yet it happens all the time. And here the secretary is saying that, okay, subsidizing debt repayment as well as more student loans will enable people to go into deeper debt for homes and automobiles, which the homes will also be subsidized by the federal government unless we privatize the housing GSEs like Fannie and Freddie. And the federal government has already taken over several automobile companies like GM and is only now divesting itself of those things. How in the world is this closed circuit where the federal government is dominating the financial activities of American families growing the economy? It doesn't work that way.
So tell me, and that was, by the way, I made a mistake here, and it's a great chance to clear up the mistake. I said Will Furman yesterday. It's the Council of Economic Advisors, Jason Furman. These are the mistakes I make, folks, so I want to be aware of them. I said Will instead of Jason, and this was pertaining to specifically the executive order and not the legislation, which makes it even more scary because we don't even get to vote on it.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So
and the legislation's actually coming to the floor of the Senate tomorrow. So this could very well get voted on tomorrow. We're going to have a vote on the rule for debate and how the Senate will decide to proceed. This issue could be on the front burner this week.
Tell me, what's the selling point is, hey, we want to help people, and the selling point to do that is to not to address the cost, is to say, well, we do so much for big oil companies and rich. I mean, I have more clips of that, but I think I don't want to make people sick. They're tired of the president just going after people that are successful or industries that are successful and doing this idea that it's a one pie, and if you take from one, it's gone from the other. In the case of government and redistribution, I guess that's how it works. But here's the question to you. What is the best argument they have for doing this? And does it further, as you mentioned, exacerbate the costs of college as they say they're trying to address that.
Well, it absolutely does, because what they're doing is creating, as I mentioned, a moral hazard. If you offer a good or service for something that is below the price that the market is charging, people are going to jump at it. Of course they will. They'll say, hey, great, cheaper money, I'll take it. Well, it's not cheaper money necessarily to the taxpayers who are underwriting the program, and therein lies the problem. You're divorcing the consumer of the service from the actual cost of the service, and when you do that, the consumer will over-consume the service. It's a lot of it's a very simple thing, and it's one reason why student loan debt has increased so much since 2007, because the federal government has offered a below-market interest rate on those loans since 2007, has been offering increased tax incentives for student loan debt for a number of years. And so the result you're going to get is more people borrowing more money, and because student establishments, colleges, technical schools, and the like, they know that. They know there's more money available, so they're going to charge more for the tuition.
I appreciate the lesson. We all do. National Taxpayers Union Executive Vice President, the great Pete Sepp. They're going to use hate to sell it. That's the other part to this. Divide and hate. Folks, we're in a very bad place in this country, but we're exposing it, and hopefully people are waking up through the grace of God. Pete Sepp, thank you, my brother. Great to be with you. And with that, I'd just like to say God knows you. God loves you. He created you. He has a purpose for you. The state is not your daddy. Crane Durham's nothing but truth. Honor your life, compassion in your heart, always keep the faith in Jesus Christ. We'll see you next time. AFR Talk.